Hello everybody. Today we are going to discuss acute severe asthma. Acute asthma, as you know, is a very common condition, occurs in as many as 5% of the population, and there are exacerbations which could be life threatening, which also have effect on the quality of life. And we will be discussing this subject under following headings. What is acute severe asthma? I will call it ASA. And what are the precipitating factors? How to recognize acute attack early? How to assess severity of attack? How to treat these patients at home? What is the emergency room treatment of ASA? When to hospitalize this patient and when to shift this patient to the ICU? What is the standard and treatment and strategies of questionable significance? What is the role of non-invasive ventilation and conventional strategies in these patients? And finally, how do we prevent future attacks of asthma? First, we will discuss what is acute severe asthma. Acute severe asthma is characterized by progressive increase in these symptoms, shortness of breath, cough, wheezing or chest tightness, progressive decline in lung function, change from the patient's usual status, and it requires change in the treatment. May occur in patients with pre-existing diagnosis of asthma or occasionally as the first presentation of asthma. Now, there has been various terminologies which have been used to designate acute severe asthma, which could be status asthmaticus, is one of the older terminology, asthma attacks, near fatal asthma, brittle asthma and refractory asthma. However, the better term is acute severe asthma. It can also be called as acute exacerbation of flare-up as depicted in GINA guidelines. The academic term exacerbation is commonly used in scientific and clinical literature, although hospital-based studies more often refer to acute severe asthma, that is ASA. Here we have to understand what is the difference between acute severe asthma as compared to the uncontrolled asthma. The uncontrolled asthma is the one where there is a frequent occurrence of breathlessness, and in those cases you have to look for poor inhaler technique, that is, which occurs in up to 80% of community patients, poor medication adherence, incorrect diagnosis of asthma, comorbidities, and ongoing exposure to sensitizing or irritant agents in the home or work environment. Now, what is in the ideal world? No patient should die of asthma. Why it happens? Because the patient thinks that I can control my asthma. I will check my peak flow meter, which is quite okay, visit my asthma doctor as and when I like, take my inhalers, take my medications, and I am avoiding my triggers. And we know that it is largely preventable or at least manageable. But what is the real world? This is a review published recently. There are 334 million asthmatics. There are as many as 250,000 deaths annually, and 80% of the deaths occur in the developing countries. And 2 out of these 3 deaths are preventable. Let us understand the pathophysiology of asthma. What happens in acute asthma? There is a chronic inflammation which is going on continuously. Sometimes it is less, sometimes it is more. Now, it is interspersed with increase in the inflammation. There could be various reasons for this. There could be triggers, there could be change of seasons, there could be change of temperature, there could be emotional stress, and quite often we don't know what are the triggers. And this leads to acute inflammation, leads to exacerbation. Why we should treat acute severe asthma and exacerbation? Because unless it is treated, it leads to structural changes, and ultimately it leads to what is called as airway modeling, where the asthma becomes a persistent asthma, and airway obstruction, instead of becoming recurrent, it becomes a persistent airway obstruction leading to continuous symptoms. Now, this asthma attacks will further lead to progressive airway narrowing due to inflammation and bronchospasm, and if not treated immediately, it will lead to increased flow resistance, increased work of breathing. It will lead to increased gas exchange inefficiency. This will lead to respiratory muscle exhaustion, and finally, what it leads to respiratory failure, which may require non-invasive ventilation or invasive mechanical ventilation. So, what are the physiological changes which occur in ASA? There is a non-uniform reversible increase in airway resistance. There are diminished flow rates, there is a premature airway closure, there is hyperinflation, there is increased work of breathing and changes in the elastic recoil. And this is showed graphically in this picture beautifully. In an obstructed lung, there is a dynamic hyperinflation. This is because there is a decreased FEV1 and peak expiratory flow rate. This will lead to respiratory muscle fatigue. This will also lead to pressure on the heart as well as lung, which will lead to fall in cardiac output, and it will also lead to increase in pulmonary vascular resistance. Now, this is a very old kind of picture taken from the book. In the x-axis, you see the FEV1, that is percent predicted. On the y-axis, there is a minute ventilation. Now, when the person get acute attack of asthma and the FEV1 is something like 80 to 90% of the predicted, the minute ventilation is almost normal. As the FEV1 becomes less, the minute ventilation increases. As you see, the minute ventilation is going up. However, when the FEV1 becomes less than 40 or 30%, patient gets exhausted, the airway obstruction becomes critical, and the minute ventilation starts coming down. And as the FEV1 becomes something like 20 to 30%, the minute ventilation becomes low, and this will lead to further rise in partial pressure of carbon dioxide, leading to respiratory acidosis. Now, this is what happens to the PCO2. This is the continuation of the same graph. On the x-axis is again FEV1, that is percent predicted. On the y-axis is the PaCO2. Initially, as the attack starts and it is a low intensity attack, the PCO2 is low. And as the FEV1 becomes something like 30 to 40%, the PCO2 becomes close to normal or within normal limits. As the patient gets exhausted and the airway obstruction becomes critical and FEV1 becomes something like 20 to 30%, PCO2 starts rising. This is a worrisome situation where the person will be required to go into the ICU and may require mechanical ventilation. Broadly, there are two types of acute severe asthma. One is called type 1, that is slow onset and late arrival, and type 2 is sudden asphyxic asthma. Type 1 is the usual type. There is a subacute worsening and it occurs in up to 80 to 85% of cases that we see. There is extensive mucus plugging, the inflammation is mainly eosinophilic, the response to treatment is slow and prevention is possible. On the other hand, the type 2 asthma, what is called a sudden asphyxic asthma, which leads to mortality also, there is acute deterioration which occurs within hours, occurs less commonly as compared to the slow onset type. The bronchi are more or less empty. So, there is a severe bronchospasm. The characteristic is that inflammation is mainly neutrophilic inflammation. However, the response to treatment is faster and prevention may not be possible because it occurs too suddenly. What are the risk factors for ASA? As I said at the outset, some may be known, some may be unknown. Broadly, the risk factors are history of near fatal asthma requiring intubation and mechanical ventilation, especially during last 1 year, hospitalization or emergency care visit for asthma in the past 1 year, those who are currently using or having recently stopped using oral corticosteroids, which is a marker of event severity, those who are not currently using inhaled corticosteroids, Overuse of short-acting beta-2 agonist, I will be calling it SABA, especially use of more than 1 canister of salbutamol equivalent in a month, that is equal to 200 puffs. A history of psychiatric disease or psychosocial problems, poor adherence with asthma medication and poor adherence with written asthma action plan, and if there is history of food allergy in a patient with asthma. All patients presenting with breathlessness are not asthmatic. Quite often the diagnosis is very evident because the patient is a known case of asthma. However, we should keep in mind other causes of acute onset shortness of breath. These are acute cardiogenic pulmonary edema, COPD exacerbation, acute pulmonary thromboembolism, central airway obstruction, which could be due to a foreign body, a pneumothorax, pneumonia or ARDS, and vocal cord dysfunction. Coming to the management of this patient, as I said at the outset, the diagnosis is not difficult. Majority of time patient is a known asthmatic, and he comes and says that, okay doctor, I have had acute attack of asthma, please treat me. So how do you manage these patients? The goals of the management are, you should correct hypoxemia, you should rapidly reverse airflow obstruction, and you should reduce the likelihood of the recurrence of the attack. These are the principles of management that, as you can see on this slide. There can be home-based management. If the patient recognizes the symptoms, we should assess the severity of exacerbation, use SABAs as early and frequently as possible, start systemic steroids early, frequent objective assessment and decision making, decision for admission and intubation and discharge should be correct, and finally the education of the patient for the asthma management plan. Now, to start with, the management of acute severe asthma always starts at home. People are doing peak expiratory flow rate called PEFR. If you do the frequent assessment of PEFR, there is some evidence that you may know few hours in advance that the patient is having an acute severe asthma because the PEFR becomes lower. Then you should use rapidly acting drugs, as I said, salbutamol or formoterol based LABA ICS combination under the SMART strategy. I will come to it later. And there should be early use of inhaled corticosteroids and short course of oral prednisolone wherever it is indicated, and there should be early hospital visit. What I want to emphasize is that one should not delay the hospital visit, because one of the cause of mortality in ICU admission is that patients think that they are doing well, they will treat themselves, and there may be a situation where there is non-realization of severity of asthma attack on the part of the patient. What are the key points for home management? Early treatment saves life. The important elements are that there should be a written action plans, that is, there should be guideline for self-management, and this is especially important for patients with persistent symptoms and history of frequent exacerbation. As I said, there should be recognition of early signs of worsening, and there should be prompt communication with the doctor about deterioration in peak flow rate. There should be reduced, if there is reduced response to bronchodilator, one should be alarmed, and if there is a diminished duration of bronchodilator response, then also one should get alarmed. What about increasing the inhaled corticosteroid? Whenever we are treating a patient with uncontrolled asthma, there is an indication to increase the inhaled corticosteroid. Now the question is whether increase in inhaled corticosteroid would prevent or better treat acute severe asthma. This is a Cochrane review on whether increased versus stable dose of inhaled corticosteroids for exacerbation of chronic asthma in adult and children. The objective of this article was to assess and compare the clinical effectiveness and safety of increased versus stable doses of inhaled corticosteroid as part of home-based management in acute asthma. The result was that it does not reduce need for oral steroids, and current evidence does not support increasing the dose of inhaled corticosteroid as part of a self-initiated action plan to treat exacerbation in adult and children. So, inference is, if the patient has acute attack of asthma, he should not increase the inhaled corticosteroid with the hope that he will not require further management. Now, other question is whether you increase the inhaled corticosteroid to 4 times. Does it prevent acute exacerbation of asthma? This was a paper published in AJR-CCM, that is a Blue Journal, in year 2009. The objective was to determine whether quadrupling, that is increasing the inhaled corticosteroid dose to 4 times, will reduce further worsening and need for oral steroids. What was the result? The result was, in the per protocol group, there was 21% versus 50% required oral steroids. So, if you increase the inhaled corticosteroids to 4 times, and that is a very supranormal dose, you will prevent the requirement of oral steroid in a significant number of cases. So, finally, this is the last slide on home-based treatment of acute severe asthma. So, what is the evidence? The evidence is that SABA should be used with increased frequency with use of spacer, that is evidence A. Low dose inhaled corticosteroid and LABA, increased frequency of reliever use, that is also evidence A under the SMART therapy. Maintenance ICS SABA at least double the dose, little poor evidence. If you quadruple the dose of inhaled corticosteroid, it is more beneficial. What about oral steroid? Add prednisolone 1 milligram per kilogram up to the dose of 50 milligram in adults if the peak expiratory flow rate is less than 60 or the patient is not responding to treatment within 48 hours. So, coming to the discussion on how to manage patient once he comes to the emergency. So, you have to go into the history very quickly, that is severity of symptoms, that is dyspnea, level of control in the past, details of medication he has already taken, dose, duration and route, patient response to deterioration. There may be some patients who perceive it very poorly. They may be very breathless, they may be tachypneic, but they will say, no, I am pretty okay. Duration of current symptoms. You also have to go into the risk factors for mortality. These are prior admissions, prior ICU care and need of mechanical ventilation in the past, and also frequent emergency visits. The initial assessment is extremely important to decide the course of action, and this includes a clinical judgment whether patient is able to speak a short sentence without breaking a breath, if there is a cyanosis, if there is the use of accessory muscles of respiration, is there a diaphoresis. If you see the perspiration on the forehead of the patient, you should get worried, probably the PCO2 is rising, patient is exhausted, and you should also assess whether there is too much anxiety on the part of patient. You may do a peak expiratory flow rate and quickly do a pulse oximetry. If the pulse oximetry shows the oxygen saturation of less than 90% on room air, one should be worried because this patient is in respiratory failure. Now, quickly you should do severity assessment, whether it is mild to moderate, whether it is acute severe, is it life threatening, is it a brittle asthma, or is it a near fatal asthma. The acute severe asthma, the peak expiratory flow rate is 30 to 50% of best or predicted, and he will be unable to complete a sentence in one breath. The respiratory rate is more than 25 per minute and heart rate is more than 100 per minute. I would like to emphasize, none of these parameters could be absolute. In the life threatening asthma, the PEFR is less than 33%, the SpO2 is less than 92%, PaO2 is less than 60%, and there could be silent chest, there could be cyanosis, there could be feeble respiration, there could be bradycardia. There could be arrhythmias, hypotension, exhaustion, confusion and coma. And I want to emphasize that these 4 points are very worrying symptoms, because these are the patients who would require ICU care. In the brittle asthma, there is wide peak PEF variability, which could be 40% of diurnal variation. In type 2, there is a sudden severe attack on the background of apparently well controlled asthma. And finally, what is near fatal asthma? As the word suggests, that these patients are at risk of dying unless managed well. If there is a rise in PCO2 or the patient requires mechanical ventilation with raised inflation pressure, these are the patients who are having near fatal asthma. What are the relevant investigation? I have already said peak expiratory flow rate, pulse oximetry and arterial blood analysis wherever indicated. Chest radiography is not indicated in all the patients with acute severe asthma. However, if there is suspicion of pneumothorax or pneumonia, or if there is a poor response to the initial treatment of acute severe asthma, then an X-ray should be done. As I have already said, ABG is not indicated in all the patients. If the FEV1 is less than 50%, or if the patient is not responding, or if the patient is confused or obtunded or is going into coma, if the patient is getting exhausted, if he is cyanosed or SpO2 is less than 90%, then you must do an arterial blood gas analysis. Now, this slide shows what happens to the ABG in patients who have acute severe asthma. In mild attack, the pH will be more because patient goes into respiratory alkalosis. The PaO2 will be close to normal. PCO2 will go down and bicarb will be close to normal. In moderate attack, the pH will be normal, the PaO2 will start going down, PCO2 may remain normal and bicarb also may remain normal. What is important to know is that in severe attack, the pH goes down. So, patient goes into acidosis, the PaO2 goes down and the PCO2 increases. And the bicarb may go down because there is anaerobic metabolism and there is an element of metabolic acidosis also. Now, whom to hospitalize? After the patient is in emergency, if the FEV1 or PEF is less than 25%, if the person is an elderly or patient has already taken 8 puffs in last 24 hours, and if there is a past history of severe asthma requiring intubation, these are the patients who require hospitalization. Now, as far as the treatment is concerned, one should start oxygen immediately. You should give bronchodilators, which could be SABA and SAMA, that is anticholinergics. There is role of systemic corticosteroids and inhaled corticosteroid, and there are strategies and drugs which have a questionable benefit, and we will be discussing it later. Coming to the oxygen inhalation, if the saturation level is less than 90% in children or adult, it needs for aggressive therapy. Controlled low flow oxygen should be given so as to maintain oxygen saturation between 93 and 95%. If there is hypoventilation and rising PaCO2 and falling PO2 indicates the development of near fatal asthma and need for intubation. And in the patient with high oxygen requirement, that is more than 8 liters of oxygen per minute, PCO2 should be closely monitored. The sheet anchor remains bronchodilators. That is the mainstay of treatment, because basically acute severe asthma is characterized by bronchoconstriction. Inhaled beta 2 agonists are the sheet anchor of management of acute severe asthma. They are most effective. The action starts within 5 minutes, and this is the initial choice. And short acting agents have a rapid onset of action. Salbutamol or levosalbutamol can be given, and MDI with spacer is most cost effective and as efficient as nebulization. Nebulization can also be given in the dose of 2.5 to 5 milligram each nebulization, These dosages is to be repeated every 20 minutes for first hour, and then it can be given according to the need based. Now, there is an issue of whether inhaled short acting beta 2 agonist, that is SABA, should be given as a continuous or bolus. Not much evidence is there. This is a meta-analysis published as a Cochrane review in 2011, which has shown that if you give continuous nebulization, there is a small but significant improvement in lung function as compared to giving bolus. So, there is some wisdom in giving continuous nebulization as compared to the bolus nebulization. Although the results are conflicting, but the GINA says that initial use of continuous therapy followed by intermittent on demand therapy for hospitalized patient should be followed. What about anticholinergics? Anticholinergics, that is called SAMA, combining nebulized ipratropium bromide with nebulized beta 2 agonist leads to greater bronchodilation, faster recovery and shorter hospital stay. So, therefore, it is useful to combine beta 2 agonist along with the SAMA and give as a nebulization or as a MDI with spacer, and leads to better outcome. Coming to the systemic steroids, first question, why to use? Because it speeds the resolution of exacerbation, prevents relapse and also prevents subsequent hospitalization and reduces the use of SABAs. Now, the question is whom to give? You cannot give systemic steroids to everybody. If the initial treatment fails to achieve improvement in symptoms, if the exacerbation develops while the patient was taking oral steroids, or if the patient has a history of previous exacerbations requiring oral steroids. These are the three main indications where you should give systemic steroids. How to give? 50 milligram of prednisolone as a single dose or 200 milligram of hydrocortisone as an injection should be given for a duration of 5 to 7 days are adequate. The evidence is B. No significant difference between oral and intravenous in terms of efficacy. Therefore, if you can give prednisolone orally, it is as good as giving hydrocortisone intravenously. Now, another question is more the merry? If you give larger doses of steroid, one would think that benefit will be more. So, this is the Cochrane Library review which has shown that whether you use a high dose or the dose, as I have already said, that is 50 milligram or 40 milligram of prednisolone, there is no advantage. So, therefore, using higher than these dosages will lead to adverse effects and no advantage. Now, what about inhaled steroids? Does inhaled steroids have a role in management of acute severe asthma? This is a paper which got published in the Chest, the rapid effects of inhaled steroids in acute asthma and evidence based evaluation. Objective was to analyze early and clinical impact of inhaled corticosteroid for patients with acute severe asthma in emergency department. What was the result? The result was the ICS present early beneficial effect when they were used in multiple doses, that is every 30 minutes for over 90 to 120 minutes. Now, this is a study, inhaled versus oral steroids in children. This was published in New England Journal of Medicine. Now, the objective was to find out whether the inhaled corticosteroids were as good as oral corticosteroids. The result was that there was 20% versus 9% increase in FEV1 and 10% versus 30% hospitalization rates in oral versus inhaled corticosteroids. The inference was that oral steroids were better than inhaled steroids in management of acute severe asthma. What about adults? This was a study by Rodigo, and this was a study which compared the inhaled steroids versus intravenous steroids. What they used, that they used 500 microgram of inhaled fluticasone every 10 minutes for 3 hours. So, it was a supranormal dose of inhaled steroids and compared it with 500 milligram of hydrocortisone. The result was that fluticasone group had better FEV1 improvement. This is the only study which has shown that inhaled steroid are better than systemic steroid, but one should not go with the idea that this is the recommendation, because the inhaled steroid dose used in this is too high as compared to what we usually use. This is another study which is published in Chest in year 2014. This compared the role of inhaled plus systemic steroids as compared to systemic steroids, and it showed that when inhaled steroids were added to the systemic steroids, there was a benefit. Now, should you use inhaled and systemic steroid as a routine? And this is the Cochrane review. The objective was to determine the benefit of inhaled corticosteroid plus systemic steroid for the treatment of acute asthma in the emergency room. The result was that there is insufficient evidence that adding inhaled corticosteroid results in clinically important changes in lung functions and clinical scores. So, ICS should not replace oral steroid. However, there is a conflicting evidence, but there is some evidence which says that if you add inhaled steroids to the systemic steroids, there would be some benefit. So, what is the current recommendation? Temporarily doubling the dose of ICS not effective, that is evidence A. High dose inhaled corticosteroid within the first hour in those not receiving systemic steroid reduces the hospitalization, that is evidence A. High dose ICS for 7 to 14 days equivalent effect to a short course of oral steroids, evidence A. As an add-on to systemic steroids, some benefit is there, so that is evidence B. Reduces the risk of asthma related death or hospitalization if continued post discharge. That of course is not a management of asthma, that is the post discharge. There is an evidence that inhaled steroids should be continued after the acute severe asthma attack. What about aminophylline? Now I am coming to the agents which have a questionable benefit, or those agents which were used previously and now given up. Intravenous aminophylline we used to use 30 years back in every patient who came to emergency and was found to be quite useful, but with advances in the treatment, it has been inferred that addition of intravenous aminophylline to inhaled beta-2 agonist in adults with acute severe asthma has no additional benefit. There is no additional bronchodilation. On the other hand, it adds to the unfavorable adverse effects. Now, coming to the another questionable agent which has been tried in acute severe asthma, that is magnesium sulfate. It has been given intravenously, and there are only case reports involving 199 patients in total, and there are inconsistent clinical responses. Magnesium sulfate has also been used as nebulization, and in fact, the SABA, that is salbutamol, is given in the solution of magnesium sulfate, and it has shown some benefit. So, what does the Cochrane review says? That the routine use is not recommended, appear to be safe and beneficial in patients with severe exacerbation. However, when you want to give magnesium as intravenously, there is no need to do magnesium levels before giving it, and there is some evidence that when used in children in the nebulization form, there is some benefit in the form of reducing the hospitalization. So, what are the indications of magnesium sulfate in clinical practice? In adults with FEV1 of less than 25 to 30% predicted, that means the most severe form of acute severe asthma, those who fail to respond to the usual therapy, and the children whose FEV1 less than 60% predicted after 1 hour of care can receive magnesium sulfate in a nebulization form. What is the dose? The dose is 2 grams over a period of 20 minutes, or it can be given as a nebulized isotonic magnesium sulfate, may be tried in those with acute severe asthma. The recommendation is grade B. However, one should realize that magnesium is not without side effects. If you give it repeatedly, there can be muscular weakness, and it itself would lead to respiratory failure. Coming to the Heliox, at one time it was a very favorite strategy to use because helium is a very light gas. However, there is no routine role of this intervention. It might be considered for patients who do not respond to standard therapy. And the Cochrane review says that existing evidence does not provide support for the administration of helium oxygen mixture to all patients with acute severe asthma. The preferred mixture is 70-30, that is 70% helium and 30% oxygen. Now, this is the study which got published in year 2014, the Heliox driven beta 2 agonist nebulization for children and adults with acute asthma, a systemic review and meta-analysis. Now, this says the data support the use of Heliox as a nebulizing beta 2 agonist driving gas in the routine care of patients with acute severe asthma. So, what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that Heliox leads to improvement in PFT variables, are more frequent and profound with Heliox driven compared to the air driven bronchodilator therapy only in asthmatic patients with baseline FEV1 of less than 50%. What this says is, the conclusion is that you may use Heliox, but use only for the nebulization when you are giving short acting beta 2 agonists. What is the role of antibiotics? There is no role of antibiotic as a routine in patient with acute severe asthma. Only when there is an evidence of infection in the form of fever, leukocytosis, or there are X-ray changes of pulmonary infiltrates, the antibiotics can be given. What about sedatives? It's a red corner notice that sedation should be strictly avoided during exacerbations, and there is a possible association between use of these drugs and avoidable asthma death. So, there is a big no to all kind of sedation. Mucolytics. Now, there is a reason to use mucolytics because there is a mucus impaction, which is the basic pathology of asthma exacerbation and inflammation, which leads to impaired ventilation. But is it beneficial? The evidence says none. Inhaled mucolytics have not shown any benefit in the treatment of exacerbation. They may worsen cough or airway obstruction as a result of loosening mucus secretion. Need to ensure good cough reflex before this treatment. So, therefore, no role of mucolytics. Other agents, epinephrine, a time-honored drug, was used 30-40 years back, no role today except in those patients with associated anaphylaxis. Nebulized furosemide, no role. There is little data to suggest a role of leukotriene modifiers in acute severe asthma. Coming to the ICU care, is the role of NIV, and it has been proposed that it has a direct bronchodilator effect, it offsets intrinsic PEEP, it improves VQ match, it assists inspiratory muscle, it decreases the work of breathing, and may be used for short periods till definitive therapy takes effect. There are no large randomized trials to show benefit of NIV in patients with acute severe asthma, so it should be used with caution. So, what is the role of NIV in asthma? The inference is that there are insufficient data, and the Cochrane review published in 2012 said that because of the paucity of data, the NIV remains controversial despite continuous use in these patients. So, post-treatment, whom to hospitalize? If the FEV1 or PEF continues to be less than 40%, if the patient is unable to lie supine, if there is a worsening dyspnea, if there are features of acute severe asthma still present after the treatment, these patients should be hospitalized. Now, whom to take to the ICU? Now, it must be understood that unlike COPD, very few patients of acute severe asthma requires ICU care, which would be actually less than 1%. The clinical indications are respiratory arrest, cardiac arrest, and coma. Other indications are if despite optimal therapy there is declining GCS, if there is agitation, if there is a falling PaO2, if there is rising PCO2, or if there is progressive acidosis, these patients must be taken to the ICU and get ready for intubation. About the intubation, there should be rapid sequence intubation. You can use ketamine or propofol for intubation, because ketamine has bronchodilator property, but it has some adverse effects. Important thing is that you should use as large as a tube as possible for endotracheal intubation. Finally, what are the ventilator settings? The ventilator settings are that the respiratory rate should be low, something between 8 and 12. The tidal volume should be between 6 and 8 ml per kilogram. There should be prolonged expiratory time, for which the flow rate will have to be high, something like 70 to 100 liters per minute. Monitor auto PEEP and PEEP-LET regularly. If you are sedating or paralyzing the patient, there is no need to give PEEP. If you are not sedating and paralyzing the patient, then you have to give external PEEP. One must practice permissive hypercapnia, that is, in order to give low tidal volume and low respirate, the PCO2 may rise. The acceptable pH is 7.15 and PCO2 may go up to 80 millimeters of mercury, and it is much better than creating hyperinflation. The contraindication to practicing permissive hypercapnia is raised intracranial pressure or post-anoxic brain injury. One must ensure while ventilating these patients that there should be adequate oxygenation. The post-intubation management includes verify the ET placement, sedate the patient and paralyze if required, monitor auto PEEP and dynamic hyperinflation, and give regular bronchodilator and steroids. And what could be the complication? There could be hypoxemia, there could be hypotension, and there could be cardiac arrest. There could be barotrauma, because you are giving positive pressure ventilation, that should be monitored. And when you use the paralyzing agent, there could be myopathies. What is the prognosis? The mortality in ICU could range from 0 to 22%. As I said at the outset that there should be 0% mortality in patients with acute severe asthma. It depends on the age and the duration of follow-up. The factors associated with increased mortality are lower initial pH, higher initial PCO2, high Apache 2 score, lower PF ratio, that is less than 200 on day 2, not on day 1, and multi-organ failure. What is the advice for discharge to these patients? Oral steroids should be continued for 5 to 7 days. Continue or initiate inhaled steroids. Inhaled bronchodilator should continue. Ipratropium bromide should be stopped. Review the inhaler techniques. Search for likely precipitating factors, and first follow-up should be within 1 week of the discharge. And what is the home plans? How do we prevent further attack? The patient education is extremely important. There should be written action plan. Avoid delays in treatment. As I said at the outset, recognize signs of deterioration. Modify or step up treatment, assess severity, and ensure timely presentation to the hospital. So what are the conclusions? The conclusion is that acute severe asthma is a common emergency in clinical practice. A large proportion can be recognized and treated early at home and in emergency room. It is important to assess severity of attack and start appropriate treatment. SABA with or without SAMA is the main initial treatment. Systemic steroids are very useful and does not require tapering when given for less than 2 weeks. There is no role of routine antibiotics or mucolytics or sedatives. NIV should be used with caution. There should be zero mortality due to acute severe asthma. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.